Hi, welcome to Tales of Dread. Tonight, we have some stories about lizardmen for you eight, so enjoy, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. I've lived in northern Alabama for a long time. I spent some of my childhood in Huntsville and some in Memphis. My late father was a doctor who also liked to hunt and be outside. He taught me from a very young age to be very interested in the natural world around us. Because of this interest, I went to MTSU to study biology, and now I work as a wildlife biologist for the state of Tennessee, putting conservation programs in place on the state's public lands, which include a lot of northern Alabama. I am also a cryptozoologist in my spare time. I don't claim to be an expert by any means, but since I moved back home, I've become more interested in the subject and have become something of a local expert on it. I've even given a few talks on the subject to groups in North Alabama. Cryptozoology is the study of animals that people say exist, but that science hasn't been able to prove yet. Things like Bigfoot, the Champ, and the Loch Ness Monster are on this list. It also includes cryptids that are less well known, like the skunk ape or the goatman. All of this is important because in northern Alabama we have our own version of the lizard man. In fact, the lizard man was first seen in South Carolina in 1988, just south of Bishopville. Since then, there have been many sightings all over the southeast, but most of them have been in South Carolina and Georgia. Most of these reports come from wooded areas in rural areas. People usually say that the creature is about 7 feet tall, has a green scaly body, and has a long snake-like tail. As I've already said, I'm by no means an expert, but I've done some research on lizard man, and here are my thoughts. There's no doubt that something strange is going on in the woods of northern Alabama. Whether it's a new kind of animal or a cryptid that hasn't been seen before, there is something out there. There are many different ways to describe the lizard man. This could be because different people see different things, or because lizard man is changing his appearance on purpose to avoid being seen, or because there are already different kinds of lizard man. There are no photographs or footprints to show that it was there. But this doesn't mean that he doesn't exist. It just makes it harder to prove. I think it's possible that the lizard man is a real creature, but it's also possible that he's just something people made up. I don't know exactly what it is, and I'm not going to try to figure it out. But I'm sure that something real is happening here in the southern states. I retired as a colonel in the Air Force, and my wife retired as a lieutenant colonel in the Army. We have lived our whole lives near military bases and with people who are always on the lookout. I also have intelligence work experience and a healthy fear of things that go bump in the night, but this night was different. I will never forget 19 August 2002. Before all of this happened, when I was a kid, my parents always talked about the possibility of living dinosaurs. They would talk about seeing dinosaurs when they were kids. They would tell us about how Grandpa was in a plane crash in South America. He helped save some missionaries who were able to catch a real dinosaur. My mother said that it looked like something from Jurassic Park. My parents were on the road from Pensacola, Florida to Montgomery, Alabama. They had been driving for a few hours and it was getting late. They had just crossed the border into Alabama when something ran out in front of the car. They had to swerve to avoid hitting it. My dad thought it was an animal, but my mum said she saw it standing up by the side of the road. She told him that no animal could stand up like that, and if it wasn't a person, then what was it? Before he could answer, they both saw another creature standing off in the distance, near some swampland not far from where this thing had run out in front of them. This one was much more like a lizard or dinosaur than the man. It was also much taller. They drove away very quickly and didn't talk about it much after that. My mother told me that its eyes were sunken into its head and that it had crocodile teeth in its mouth. It had a thick neck that stuck out at an angle from the body. It almost looked like a hunchback with really long arms, but the face was more leathery. My dad thought he saw a crest or ridge on the top of its head, but my mom didn't mention it, so I'm not sure if she did too. My dad keeps saying that he doesn't know what they saw that night, but it was definitely not a person. He also says that whatever was standing near the swamps looked more like a dinosaur. I'm not sure what to think about that. I know that my parents are the type to make things up. That night, they must have both seen something. They don't know what it is, and I wanted to let you know that my parents have seen it again since that night. A few years later, they were driving on a similar road and saw the same creature standing in the swamps. This time, they got a better look at it and said it was exactly the same as the one they had seen before. My dad was able to get a picture of it, but it was so blurry that it was useless and couldn't be shared. I'm not sure if I'll be able to do it all myself, but I thought you should know what they did. I am in my first year at the University of North Florida. My field is anthropology, but fake science and cryptozoology have always been interesting to me. My name doesn't have much to do with this report, so I won't put it in. I was born and raised in Northeast Florida, which is Jacksonville or the First Coast. It's part of a state that has always been a mystery to me. Older people still tell stories about Bigfoot, Sasquatch men in black, and more common urban legends like the goat man and skunk ape. These stories were told to me by my grandfathers who lived here for most of their lives. I had planned to move away from Jacksonville after I graduated from high school in 2010, but I'm still here 4 years later. I feel like this place has some kind of strange magnetic pull on me, and lately it seems like the mysteries have been showing up in small bits and pieces, usually when I'm not looking for them. I was out late at night driving around and listening to music. It was probably 1:30 am. I was in Nassau County, about an hour north of Jacksonville, on a pretty rural road. You definitely wouldn't expect to see someone driving around there, even more so late at night. I was on a sharp turn at the top of a hill when I saw a car parked on the side of the road. The driver's side door was open and the car was off. As I got closer, I slowed down because I thought someone might need help. But as I got closer, I could see that someone was standing next to the car, but it wasn't a person. It looked like a lizard person. I hit the brakes hard and swerved around the car, which ended up in a ditch on the other side of the road. I was horrified as I saw this thing walk toward my car in my rearview mirror. I fumbled with my phone slowly, almost carefully, to call 911, but before I could even get it out of my pocket, it was gone. I didn't see it again, but I still remember what I saw. It doesn't help. There are swamps all around me. I'm not sure what to think about it, but I'm glad I'm okay. I thought it would be good to talk about it with someone who might understand. I saw a car, and it looked like it had been left somewhere. His face was strange, though. It looked like a cross between a lizard and a person, but it wasn't exactly either. It had glowing eyes that were set deep into its head. This green, this yellow, and my car's headlights. The skin on its face looked like it had scales and was thick, like some kind of ancient armor. There was no hair on his body, but there was a strange line that went from the middle of his forehead to the small of his back. I didn't see any ears or a nose, but his lips and teeth looked like those of a person. He definitely wasn't wearing anything you couldn't imagine. The whole thing only took a few seconds, but it felt like it went on for a long time. It was the scariest thing I've ever been through, and it still keeps me from sleeping at night. Again, the car was parked on the side of the road and the door on the driver's side was open, but no one was inside. This lizard-like thing came over to my car. As I got closer, he walked out of the swamps right next to where I had parked my car. After what I saw, I looked around and saw that there were no footprints or other signs that anyone else had been in the area with us. Blood trails, and also nothing. A week or so before this happened, I had a strange experience outside my house. Anyway, I also talked to my uncle, who lives in the area where I saw the lizard man. He told me that people in that area had been talking about this thing for years. No one is sure what it is or why it's there. I'm starting to think that this creature might not just be a story. Since this happened, every time I leave my house, I feel more and more scared. I no longer like going out at night. If I ever run into this thing, I'm afraid it will kill me. It's been hard to sleep knowing that this thing is out there somewhere in the dark. I've asked myself that question 1,000 times, but I still don't know the answer. It didn't seem human in the way we use the word today, but it didn't seem like an animal either. I don't think you could call this thing evil, but it felt like it was out to hurt someone. I'm not crazy. If anything, it might be the other way around. Before this, I had never heard of Lizard Man, so I couldn't have made up these details ahead of time to make people believe me. I like to think of myself as an experienced outdoorsman, but I know that a lot of people say the same thing. Since I was a little boy, I've been hunting and fishing. What I mean is clear to me when I see it. I'm also proud to have a degree in wildlife and fishery science. Tonight, September 9, 2017, I saw something in the bayous near my house as I was driving home from work. I know I'm going to sound crazy, but it looks like an alligator person. It was about dusk, and it was about 30 yards away on the other side of the river. It looked like it was about 7 feet tall, had a long nose, and greenish skin. As I drove by, it didn't move. I don't really know what it was. It had a long nose with small, sharp teeth. What bothered me the most, though, was its eyes. I've always hunted and fished in the bayou up to my waist, but I've never been brave enough to go deeper. Since it became part of the National Wildlife Refuge, my family has owned the land there for close to 100 years. But now I know for sure that it's out there. I got a good look at it, so I can tell you more about it. The alligator-like person had skin that was brownish-grey. It was loose and wrinkly, like the skin of an alligator. It stood about 8 to 9 feet tall. It had a long nose and shorter ears. Its scales were greenish-grey, but it was getting dark, so it was hard to see its other features. I know the area where I saw it well. It is a large swampy part of the bayou that is right next to our house. This part goes back for miles into land that a friend of ours owns. It lives in this body of water, which drains into another one about 30 miles long and even bigger. It's a murky, dark place that's unlike anything I've ever seen. That's why I got in touch with you about it. I've been having trouble sleeping. I can't stop thinking about what could have happened. Had I left my car and moved closer, I've been having bad dreams too. I've always fished and hunted in the bayou up to my waist, but I've never been brave enough to go deeper. My family has owned that land for close to 100 years. I don't know how to think about all of this. I wanted to tell you about something I saw while hunting in South Carolina yesterday. I know that Bigfoot sightings are interesting to you, but this was not one of them. I've talked about it with other hunters. People think I'm mad, so I'll just keep it short until I can get some real feedback from someone with an open mind. Here's what happened. Adam was walking up the hill ahead of me about 100 yards when he stopped, turned around, and yelled at me to hurry because there were deer nearby. As I got closer, he told me not to look behind him or run into him because a big reptile was standing next to him and looking at its feet. It didn't snap, growl, or make any other sound. He said right away that it just stood there and looked at him with a look of shock and confusion. He got scared when he thought about the movie Anaconda. The creature was easily 8 to 10 feet tall, had a greenish-grey skin colour, and had a lot of muscle. The eyes were bright and sharp. He told me that he really wanted to shoot it, but knew he couldn't. He said that there were other hunters in the area. The thing finally turned around and walked into the woods behind him, where it was no longer seen. I don't know what this thing was, but I know it wasn't a person. I'm wondering if you or anyone else has heard of something similar. The face was also very wide and flat, with a ridge above the eyes that went all the way back to a small bony protrusion on the top of the head, making it look like a horn. The eye sockets were oval, slightly angled up, and set about halfway back on each side of the skull. It had a few holes where the nose would be, but we couldn't see any real opening to the nasal cavity. The skin was a light greenish-grey, like that of a crocodile, and there were no ears or lips that could be seen. I think it had a head, back, legs, and a tail. When it turned around, it looked like it had dark brown or black scales or plates all over it, just like a crocodile. I could also see that its chest was covered with scales, but these ones were much bigger and had more of them than the ones on the rest of its body. It didn't look like it had scales on its belly, sides, or inside of its thighs. It never made a sound and never opened its mouth. It also had no teeth. It never tried to attack, grab, or eat anything, and it never moved toward us. It just stood there and stared straight ahead. As I said, he found the movie right away in a condo and was very scared. The thing didn't start out growling or making noise, so I'll just keep it as short as I can until I can get some feedback from someone with an open mind. I don't know what this was, but I don't think it was a person dressed up in a costume. We had this happen to us on June 12, 1994, 59, going north at around 2 in the morning. I worked for the local police department. I can't tell you what the real PD name is. I was going north on my way to work at night. On the east side of the highway, I saw what looked like a big man crawling out of a ditch. I turned around to find out what was going on, and as I got closer, I saw that it wasn't a man. The thing looked like a lizard. I pulled over in my patrol car and got out to look into it. As I got closer, I could tell it was a lizard, but not just any lizard. It was a giant, 8-9 foot long lizard that looked like a man. It had a long tail and was big and strong. It must have seen me coming because it took off quickly on the east side of the highway. I didn't expect to see that kind of animal out in the open like that. Nothing like this has ever happened to me before. I think it was probably some kind of science experiment gone wrong that got away. I'm glad this thing didn't run into my car while I was driving. It would have come as a big surprise. Also, I'd be very interested in hearing about or seeing this creature again. I know it's something I won't forget either. I was just thinking about it the other day, and I remembered that on the same night, but on a different highway, we got a report of a strange creature. I don't know if it has anything to do with it or not, but I figured you might want to know. It's very likely that this has something to do with the lizard man I saw. I also have to say that this experience has made a big difference in my life. Even after all these years, I still think about it. I'm just very interested in what I saw. I'd like to hear about any other stories, theories, or sightings of a creature like this. It looked like a reptile because it had a long snout, green skin that looked like scales, deep-set dark eyes, and very strong arms. I remember, that's not something that's easy to forget. After working in law enforcement for so many years, I think about it a lot. I want to know what this is and where it came from, as I said. If anyone reading or listening to this has had a similar experience or knows anything else about the lizard man, please let me know. I want to know why I've been having bad dreams about that thing since that night. I got scared of reptiles, which was something I didn't do before. In a way, it was scary, but I'm very interested in it overall. I'm sure that it will be something I remember for a very long time. Just to be clear, I have no reason to make up any of this. You could ask anyone in my family. I was driving at 9:30 p.m. on December 29, a Friday night, near Montgomery, Pennsylvania, on Route 73. It's not too far from Valley Forge National Park and is pretty close to Philadelphia. Near the art museum, there are some condos that look kind of new, and I've always thought they were strange. They said they would open in 2010, but they didn't really do it until just recently. Even though it was dark, you could see pretty well because there wasn't much foliage. So I was driving west, which is the way most people go to get to Philadelphia, when I saw a stain about 50 feet from the road. At first, I thought it was a deer standing next to the big cement base of one of those new condos. But as I got closer, I could see that it was huge, at the very least, at least 8 feet tall. It also had a long tail that moved slowly back and forth underneath it. As it stood there, it looked at me as I drove by. It also didn't seem to notice my car until just then, when our eyes locked for what felt like forever. It flinched really hard and hopped down the road towards the condos on 2 legs, squealing and hissing constantly. I thought it looked a bit like a big, standing kimono dragon, but it was more red. I couldn't tell if it was furry or not, but I think it probably wasn't. Its nose was very long, and its eyes were big. Its tail was at least 3 feet long and could have been longer. I also remember that the body was very big. After a bit more driving, I pulled over and saw another one peeking out from behind the same condos. So now there were 2 of them running between buildings, jumping around and squealing. I called 911 to say what happened. They told me that someone else had seen the same thing I did that night near where I was. I'm not sure if anyone believed them or not. They told me that no one would be coming to look into it until Monday. I decided to go around the neighborhood and knock on doors to ask people what they knew. Now things start to get strange. When I said it, a lot of these people looked scared. They would, of course. I talked to a woman whose window was right next to where this was going on. She turned very pale and told me that she couldn't give me any information, but that her neighbor could. So I looked in the complex directory for the person's number and called her right away. She was an older woman who seemed eager to meet with me. So I went to meet her there. She opened the door, but she was so scared that she didn't look at me or say anything. She kept saying she needed to quickly get something from her bedroom upstairs, so she told me to wait in her living room and ran upstairs. I didn't want to make her feel worse by going up there with her, so I stayed put. While she was gone, I looked at some family photos, but I didn't notice anything strange about them. Most of the pictures were of normal-looking people and places, but when she got back, she had this really big book in her hands. It was kind of like an encyclopedia. She looked me in the eyes and gave me the book. Riptides was the name for it. A field guide to reptilian humanoids with pictures of these strange creatures that looked a little bit like people. They were all dressed in strange clothes that looked almost like spacesuits. They live in the same place as us. She told me that she told me to keep the book because she no longer needed it. It was a book she had written on her own, but to be careful and not tell anyone, it sounded like she was afraid for her own safety when I read it. I started to wonder if any of these reptoids were still alive. So that's why I'm telling you this. I don't know what to do with all this new information or who to talk to about it. I'm not sure if these reptoids are the same thing that was outside the window that night, but I can't ignore the similarity. The woman told me that these creatures are underground aliens or part of a race that eats human flesh. Still, I don't know what's going on, even though it seems like something crazy is happening. I won't be taken seriously by anyone, so I've given you information about this creature that you might be able to use. I just hope that someone out there can help me figure out what's going on. It feels like my world is starting to turn upside down. I've thought about your question, and I think the older woman's name was Catherine. Her home is in the Wilshire Boulevard Morningside condos. I don't know if this helps, but she did tell me that some of her neighbours have been having strange dreams in which strange foreign-looking people are chasing them. Anyway, this book she gave me seems to have been printed a long time ago. It's an old book and doesn't seem like something that most people would take seriously. She said she had it for a long time and there were only a few copies. Let me know if there's anything else I can tell you. I'm still trying to figure out what it all means. I was working the night shift at a small factory near Tampa, Florida, when this happened. Most nights, a group of us would sleep there to get some extra hours. When business is slow, one night it was late, and everyone had left except my boss, who was still working on something. I stayed a little longer so I could keep him company. Well, my boss told me he was leaving around 2:00 am, so I turned off all the lights in the building and walked out with him, locking the door behind us. We went outside. I turned around and saw our silhouette standing in front of us. Suddenly, another creature stood right next to it, but not touching it. It looked like it was staring us down. At first I was scared, but as I looked at it more closely, I saw that it wasn't aggressive at all and seemed just as interested in us as we were in it. My boss was scared about it. I was instantly interested. It stood straight up like a person, but it looked more like a big lizard standing on 2 feet. Its skin looked very dull, and its head was the right size for the rest of its body. Its eyes were like small black pearls that seemed to give off a dark glow. One nearby streetlight was the only source of light that night, and it almost made the creature's skin look off-white. It had 2 very short arms, with 3 long fingers at the end of each. It had legs that looked like human legs and feet that looked like big bird feet. Each foot had 3 toes. When I asked my boss if he had seen it, he said, "Yeah, I saw it pretty well." He then told me that the creature's eyes were glowing bright red before walking away. But I only saw black, even though I was close enough to see it, which is probably why I'm still alive today. This creature's face had a large white crest of spikes on its forehead, a very large jawbone that looked like a beak, and rows of very sharp teeth with serrations. I couldn't tell if they had claws on their hands or on their feet. The lights were hard to see. We were standing next to each other, so it was hard to tell exactly how tall it was. However, based on my height of 58 inches and the height of my boss, who is about 5 feet 10 inches, I would say it was about 20 feet. The other creature might have been between 6 and 7 feet tall. It was nothing I had ever seen before. It's hard to explain, but again, it looks like a cross between a human and a lizard, like something you'd see in a movie. But this was real, and even though I was interested, I was shocked to say the least as I stood there. When it saw us, it seemed like the 2 of us made it not trust us, because after a second or so, it turned around and ran quickly into the darkness. I had my camera phone with me, but it had been gone for a long time by this point. Even the way it moved was very graceful and human-like, almost like a dancer, if that makes sense. And it moved around like it didn't care about anything. I think it could have taken us out without much trouble if it had wanted to, but it didn't get too close. I don't think it was my fault. I think it probably just didn't want to be seen. At that moment, we were both in our own little worlds. We were the only ones there, along with this thing. It didn't look like anything we'd ever seen in our lives. It's hard to say what it is. I think that whatever this thing was, it came from the nearby swamps. It's possible that this thing was just passing through, but I'm not sure if I'll ever find out or if I'll want to. After that night, I went home and did some research on the internet. I spent a lot of time thinking about what this could have been or what it was. I didn't really find anything. You see, there aren't a lot of reports or people talking about seeing big lizards that stand up straight. I guess that makes sense, which makes me wonder if what I saw was even real, since both my boss and I were completely sober and saw the same thing. Whatever it was, though, it was scary, even though it was interesting at the time. I just hope it doesn't happen again. That night, I don't know what he was doing there. Most likely, it was just passing through, and we were in the wrong place at the wrong time to see it. I really wish I hadn't seen it at all. This is not a story I made up, but one I was told to tell to others. I did not experience it. It was my grandmother, to be exact. She was going to Cloud Island Canyon State Park on the road that goes there. It was right on the edge of the canyon, in a very remote place where no one seems to drive after dark. She didn't notice how quiet the road was until her car stopped working all of a sudden, a few hundred yards from the park's entrance. She also noticed that the air had a strange magnetic feeling, like static. She thought it was strange that her car had died out of the blue. In fact, she told me that she had just gotten her car tuned up about 2 or 3 weeks before. She got a new battery, had the transmission fixed, and did everything else. I remember that she paid a lot of money to get her car fixed. It was in bad shape, and it took all of us to finally get Grandma to fix it. Anyway, that just proves that her car and battery shouldn't have died all of a sudden, like they did. My grandmother is also from that generation, and people from that generation are pretty tough. My grandmother gets out of the car, opens the hood, and looks around to see what happened. As she does this, she sees a huge slimy creature climb out of the ditch and onto the road, heading toward her. She says that it was about 10 feet tall, had long, stringy hair, and looked like a reptile. She said that it looked like a monster and that she was so scared. She ran back into the car's cab and pulled her gun out of its holster. But she said that when she turned her head back to look for it, it was already gone. She held onto her gun and waited for help to come. I don't know if she called a tow truck or called Star or what, but eventually a truck came and took her back to civilization. She says it was one of the scariest things she's ever seen or heard, and she says they looked like they came from the bottom of hell. She even told me that the thing was very wide and that its skin looked like it was made of jello. At one point, she said, it was just standing there on 2 legs, almost swaying back and forth, and looking at her before it ran at her. Once this happened, she lost it, of course. Even so, she didn't get a good look at its face. The whole thing happened in about 30 seconds. I've done more research on the area as a whole. There have also been many sightings of Bigfoot in this area. I'm not sure if they have anything to do with each other, but when you put all the pieces together, it does seem strange. I'd like to know what you think about everything. If anything, I think it makes her story even stronger. Again, my grandmother is a person with a lot of heart. She has no reason to make up this story. She doesn't get anything out of it. She has no reason to do it. And every time she tells me this story, which has happened probably 4 times by now, the same things happen, and her whole attitude changes. She goes from being calm, collected, and serious to being very nervous and shaking, especially when she remembers turning around and seeing something pull itself out of the woods and onto the road. She said that she had never been that scared in her whole life. And this woman's first marriage was with a man who was so crazy. He tried to kill her by driving his truck into her. Even though that was scary on its own, it wasn't as scary as seeing this thing right now before I go into my sighting. Let me start by saying that I've never seen anything like this before in my life, and as far as I know, no one else I've talked to has either. So, allow me to tell you what happened. Late at night, I was on my way home from work. It was 11:15 at night, even though I always leave work at 10:45. That's how I know. It takes me a while to get all my stuff, get to my car, and drive home after I clock out. Now, I was in Davis County, Utah, on a quiet country road, and this is what happened. I thought I saw a big black snake in the middle of the road. I thought it was strange at first because it was so big and kind of like a huge letter A. I don't know why I first thought it was a snake, but I did. I slowed down, and as I got closer, I could see that it was definitely not a snake, but rather a large black animal that looked like a lizard standing on its back legs. It was at least 4 feet tall, and its tail was long. It looked like something from a horror movie, and the way it was standing in the middle of the road gave me the impression that it was trying to get me out of my car. I stepped on the gas pedal as I drove by at about 80 mph. When I looked in my rearview mirror though, I saw that the creature had stopped looking at me and was now facing something off in the distance. At this point, I thought it might be too late and that this thing would catch up to my car and kill me. Luckily, this did not happen. Even though I thought about all of those things, I made it home safely. But I was only about 40 minutes from home, which was a good thing. When I got home, I kept my hunting rifle close and had no plans to drive that road again, and I don't mind taking the longer way to and from work from now on. I'm a white man who is 29 years old and has red hair and blue eyes. I'm 63 years old and about 215 pounds, even though I had just lost 30 the summer before last. My teeth are very big, which makes me feel pretty bad about myself. My skin is not at all sensitive to sunlight, so I can stay out in the sun as long as I want without worrying about getting pink or burned. I just moved to Omaha, Nebraska, and then after a really bad toxic relationship, I moved to Utah. I've always been interested in ufology, but I never thought anything like this would happen to me. On June 26, 2011, around 11:30 a.m., I was driving to my girlfriend's house. I had just turned onto Foothill Drive when I saw something in the distance that I thought was very strange. This whole area is very rural and has a bit of a bad reputation. It goes south of Layton, Utah, to a lot of farms. The first thing I did was slow down more than what was allowed. Look for signs of this thing because it seems to have gone away. I thought it was strange. I didn't see this tall figure standing by a tree about 20 yards away from me until I had passed where it should have been. At this point, I could see that everything was wrong, about 50 feet away from it. I could see it much better than before. When I first saw the person standing by the tree, I thought it might have been a drug addict trying to get my attention or just get away from me. But when I got close enough to see it, I knew it was a living thing. I thought at the time that someone might have dropped off an escaped mental patient to be used in an experiment, or that this thing might be a mutated person. The figure was standing straight up, and I could see that it was covered from head to toe with these green scales. It looks green, but also kind of dark, like it's wet. It had small, black eyes and a long snout. Its mouth and jaws were full of sharp teeth that stuck out. But as I looked at this thing, I noticed that it was looking down at the ground, and I didn't know why. And by this time, I was almost unable to keep looking at this thing. And I had that moment, like in the movie The Predator, when Arnold Schwarzenegger looks at the Predator and asks, "What are you?" That's how I felt when I looked at this thing for a while. Then it must have realized I was looking at it because it immediately lifted its head, opened its mouth, and showed me all these horrible teeth. It seemed like I had hurt it by looking at it and trying to figure out what it was, what it is. At least that's what I think it did when it let out this hiss, and started running fast toward my car. It went half the way there. In just a few seconds, I turned the car around and slammed on the gas, sending the wheels spinning and the tires squealing. When I kept looking in my rearview mirror and the door on the passenger side, I couldn't find it anywhere. When I got home, I went online right away to try to find out what I had seen since then. If I tried to talk about it, who would believe me? I read about lizard people and other cryptids in articles, but I never thought I would actually see one. I'll keep looking and see what I can find, but I can't promise that I'll find that thing again, or even that I want to. In 2003 and 2004, my mistress and I dated for a few months. She was a stay-at-home mom, and she would come with me to my art galleries to keep an eye on them while I took care of other things. During this time, she saw all of my personal experiences for herself. I'm telling you this story because it's the one that scared me the most and has had the biggest impact on my life. This happened a long time before I knew what was going on or who we were dealing with. My girlfriend's sister won't be identified, and her family won't know anything about our past. So please also respect their privacy. We live in Overland Park, Kansas and work with disabled adults in the public sector. We are both 40 years old. I don't know what year it was, but I was 18 years old in my mind. In the summer, the sun hadn't gone down yet. It had to be around 6 o'clock. When I heard the strange screeching sound, I looked at my watch. The sound made me think right away of a woman or a child screaming. It caught my eye, so I looked up to see if I could hear anything. When I looked up, I saw something that will always stay with me. I don't know how to explain this. It was not a person. Its head looked like an upside-down triangle, and its eyes were big and round. It had pale skin that was almost colourless. I just stood there because I was too scared to move. I couldn't move or go anywhere. I put my head down and closed my eyes when the thing got closer. I could feel the strange electric feeling going through my whole body. It made my skin tingle. The screeching sound got louder and louder, and it also got louder. I was trying to figure out how to get away from this thing, and my mind was going crazy. When I finally got the courage to look back and see what was going on, that's what I saw. A second thing showed up. We will call this one thing B to make things clear. In an instant, this new creature changed from a dark silhouette into a being that looked like a reptile. Entity B was the same as Entity A, except that its skin had strange marks on it. Because they were so scary, I couldn't stand to look at them for more than a few seconds. And after what seemed like forever, they both disappeared right in front of me. This really messed me up. I ran into the house and stayed there for days. I didn't tell anyone about what happened to me for a very long time. When I finally did, it was with my then mistress, and we both agreed that it must have been a demon. This sighting has changed me a lot, and I think that extraterrestrial beings are also involved. I think that telling you this now will be controversial, but that's fine with me. I'd rather the truth come out and people know about these things. I think they were some kind of being, maybe from another world or something supernatural. Whatever they were, I think they were there to warn me or at least hurt me in some way. I don't know why they manifested in front of me, but whatever it was, I'm just glad I don't have to see them again. Certainly, I'm not sure. It's been a long time since that first meeting, but I still remember it. My first girlfriend in 1981 or 1982 was a white witch who also worked as a librarian, which I found interesting. She liked to do research and read almost everything. I'm 58 now, so I was between 18 and 19 years old during this time. And I just recently told this story to a family member after talking to them on the phone. It happened at that time in Kent County, Michigan, where I lived on 40 acres with my parents. I still hadn't moved out, how everything began. It was around 7 p.m. When I was reading a book or doing something else one night, I remember seeing something that scared me to death. Its face or head was the first thing I saw, then its whole upper body, and it just stood there staring at me. I just wanted to run, but I couldn't. I should say that none of its parts were touching the floor. It looked like a reptile because it had a face like a reptile and eyes like a lizard. After maybe 10 seconds, it turned around and walked away. I saw it looking through the window at me. Well, it turns out that my crazy girlfriend at the time did dark magic, and I think she turned on me because she was upset that I thought I was talking to other girls and cheating on her. I broke up with her, and I think she cursed me for a while because a lot of strange things happened to me in my early 20s. That's all in the past now, but I still wonder if the thing I saw that day was a demon that she sent after me. I was in the Marines for a few years in the 1990s. I used to be a combat engineer. I've travelled all over the world and seen a lot of scary things. I am now a contractor working overseas. I went bow hunting for deer at night around 9 p.m. This happened right next to New York City. It was November, so it was about 35 and pretty cold. I just climbed up a small hill to see the area I was hunting in better. As soon as I got to the top, I saw movement in the woods about 60 yards away. I first thought it was a big deer, but then I saw that it didn't look right. Whatever it was, its legs were much bigger than those of any deer I've ever seen. It walked past the area and into the woods on the other side, where it disappeared. Even though I couldn't see a face or tell what it really was, I can say this much. It had scales all over its body, and the way its flesh moved and shone made it look like a snake. I know what I'm telling you sounds crazy, but what I'm telling you is true. The whole thing happened so quickly that it didn't take more than 5 seconds. I was scared when I saw it, and it's been a lot longer than a few months. It makes it hard for me to sleep at night. I'm glad I had at least one weapon with me, because I don't know what that thing would have done if it had caught me by surprise and I didn't have a knife, a bow, or any kind of weapon. Has anyone else seen or heard about something similar where they live? Or am I just an old, crazy man who sees things in the woods? I'm good at seeing animals, and I know a lot about most of the animals in Missouri. I was hunting deer on private land about a mile from my house. I have been hunting in this area for at least 8 years. I just climbed up on a ridge. I was watching some does feeding in a clearing when I saw the most unusual creature walking down the ridgeway, maybe 150 yards away. Guessing, I immediately knew this wasn't a deer, hog, turkey, coyote, or bobcat. This thing was walking on 2 legs and had a tail. It was dark grey with a large head and seemed to have the same type of scales. The scales resembled those of a crocodile or an alligator. In fact, the whole thing looked like one standing up on its hind legs. It was maybe 6 to 7 feet tall, but it's hard to say, judging from the distance I was at. I instantly froze up and became terrified. This creature looked up and noticed me, stopped and stared at me for a few moments before turning bounding off into the woods. Its speed was incredible. I even tried to track it but lost the trail in just a few moments. This whole thing has completely rocked my world, and I have not been able to get it out of my head since it happened. I've since thought about what I saw, and I'm quite confident that it was real. After all, I am a very avid hunter-fisherman, and I love the outdoors. I know a deer, hogs, coyotes, bobcats, etc. look like this thing did not match any of those descriptions. Not even a bear or any creature that I'm remotely familiar with. That's why it remains so puzzling to me. I was hunting on private land, as I said, by a ridge in Newton County, Missouri. The face also was a light grey. The mouth did not move at all and had a very long snout and teeth that I could barely see, judging by the size. I don't recall seeing any eyes or ears. I wonder what it was. I don't think it was a Bigfoot. It did not look Bigfooty at all at the distance I was from. I also did not notice any hair. The body shape was also bulky, and the tail was long and tapered. The legs were muscular, and it walked on 2 legs like a human being. I thought it was strange that when it stood there and stared at me, I was trying to identify what it was, and it knew I saw it almost like it was taunting me with its body language. Then it just disappeared and ran off. I have thought about this for years and years. I've never seen anything like it since. I'm still shaken up about it, even though I didn't notice everything that could help identify what it was. I can tell you though, if I see anything like it again, I'll be sure to have a camera at the ready.